Hi, I'm Jerry Portwood, the host of the Queer Love podcast, and I'm honored to have Michael Carroll join me today. Michael's the author of the short story collections Little Reef and Stella Maris and Other Key West Stories. He was also the husband of the late Edmund White. Their relationship began in 1995 and they married in 2013. I was talking to Michael a few months ago after he suffered his loss, and he told me he was working on a memoir about his relationship with Ed. And I asked if he'd be willing to share some of the work in progress, and he said yes. So now here we are. So thanks for joining me, Michael.
Thank you.
So this is the first time I've actually done the podcast and had to talk about such heavy topics. And so,
Me too. I haven't talked to anyone on air.
well, I thank you for sharing with me then.
So, actually, I suddenly got nervous.
It's okay to be nervous.
Am I going to cry?
You can cry if you want. I'm not going to judge. Well, so let's start. You lost Ed back in June, and the tributes were everywhere. I mean, there were several in the New York Times, hundreds of other publications, people's blogs, on social media, and you were still grieving. So what was it like to, both be living in both those worlds, seeing all of this, outpouring of grief while you were still dealing with it?
It's funny. One of the titles for the book, possible titles, is Grief Chuckles, because that's how I respond to people's condolences. It's like a defense mechanism, like I'm laughing so I don't cry kind of thing.
Right.
And kindness triggers that. Kindness just completely triggers that in me. Cruelty just makes me angry,
Hmm.
you know. And so I was just seeing a lot of nice stuff. It was amazing. I mean, people were saying to me, I don't think even Salman Rushdie is going to have that kind of press, a full page starting on the first page below the fold, but okay.
Right. There was a tribute that was teased on A1, the first front page of the New York Times, and then a full page inside.
Yeah, it was his obituary, which I had vetted the previous summer for Fred Bernstein, who wrote it.
I mean, first, that already has to be difficult, right? As you said, you were vetting his obituary. You guys were preparing for this, the inevitable, but at the same time, you don't want it to happen.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Well, it's lie awake at night stuff, you know. For years I've been thinking, "Oh my God, I'll have to do a memorial service. What the hell? I'll have to plan that." And then you have to tell people you can't read because we already have 20 or something like that. So I always lead from fear. So that's why I'm a perfect American. I lead from fear. Like right now, I'm scared my kitchen cabinets are going to fall down. And I'm hoping to get money for my book so that I can get new cabinets. I just lead from fear about all the time. So whenever I would take him to the doctor because his mobility was so poor, the night before I'd be like, well, I hope we make it. Just getting him up the front steps. You've been down my steps before. Yeah, always prepared for it, but not prepared to watch someone die on the floor of his bedroom.
Right? You were holding him in your arms, right?
I was hovering, but yeah, like that.
So you guys had been together for 30 years. You met in 1995 and you'd been legally married since 2013, correct?
Yes,
And you are 25 years younger.
right. I just turned 61 last week.
Congratulations.
So I'm 6 years older than Ed was when I met him.
Okay, that's weird. So tell me about that.
It all adds up to weird. Well, first of all, I spent 30 birthdays with him, and not this year. We met, I guess for him, it's the ideal circumstances because I'm not very sexually dynamic, but I was a big fan, and I could speak pretty knowingly about his work. And so I was living in the Czech Republic teaching at a university, and I wrote him a fan letter because I had been seeing all this stuff. Genet had come out 2 years before. The British press published so much more about him. So I hadn't seen the British press until I went to the British Council in Pilsen and just kept running into his work. And I'm like, oh my God, he's alive. That was the That was the energy. It's like, he's alive because he's been warning people for years he's going to die,
Because he was living with HIV, and so yeah.
He was diagnosed in 85. He was convinced he had gotten it well before that, but that's a discussion for a scientist.
And we should also note that when you say you wrote him a fan letter, it literally was a letter because this is probably before email.
Typed. I had a manual typewriter with me, and I typed it. And if I made a mistake, I would pull the sheet out and start over.
Did he keep the letter? Do you guys still have it?
No, because he didn't get it in letter form. He got it in fax form. I sent it to his agent here in New York. I had a writing professor in Ohio who had been represented by this same person. When I read some of his short stories, one of them was dedicated to her.
Mm-hmm.
So I just looked her up in the International Literary Marketplace and got her address, and he surveilled her.
And it worked.
And then he wrote back a postcard. I think he had just gone to Sydney, and I said I was coming to Paris, and I was checking into a youth hostel called Le Mige, and he said, yes, when you come, we'll have coffee or something like that. And I had never been to Paris, and I got off the bus and I got into town. The bus station was way out. It's no longer there, I understand. And found the hostel, checked in. And then after I called him, I realized that he lived in the same neighborhood as the youth hostel.
Oh.
And I mean, literally 6 blocks away. That's not much. I went over to see him, and I brought white tulips because it was Easter weekend.
Look at you, a romantic.
Well, that's counter hospitality, or so, I don't know. But he lets me in. He goes, "Oh, what lovely white roses." He's just because one of the funny things about him is that even though he seems very encyclopedic, he doesn't know the names of plants.
Mm-hmm.
He just doesn't know. He knows more about animal behavior from ghostwriting textbooks in the 70s than about the rest of the natural world. And then I never stayed in the youth hostel that weekend. I stayed with him. And what I have to read is actually about that weekend. It was the first part I wrote, just a couple of pages. Because that weekend, I met his cousin, the same weekend he met his cousin for the first time. And his cousin was gay, and he was from Texas, and we all have a Texas background. I don't know, do you have a Texas background?
I do, actually.
Of course.
I wasn't
Everybody
born in
does.
Texas. I was born in South Florida, but I actually grew up from second grade to sixth grade in North Texas, in Wichita Falls, Texas.
Right. So at second grade, I left Texas, went to North Florida. And I am grateful that it was so boring growing up there because I just was naturally inclined to read. And that was my only privacy and haven in a world of religious bigots where I was wrong about everything. I just couldn't share that.
Where in North Florida was it?
In Jacksonville.
So were you in Jacksonville when you read A Boy's Own Story?
I was in Tallahassee, Florida, because I went to Florida State. My college boyfriend at the time, we took a road trip and we read aloud to each other from States of Desire. So States of Desire was the first one, and it was a long drive, and we just laughed and laughed, not just because of Ed's humor, but his observations, the very particular way he made observations. And then he would just naturally refer to the anatomy because, that's part of what they were talking about. So,
well, and we should let people know States of Desire was out of print for a long time, but it's now back in print, correct?
University of Wisconsin, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you basically were creating your own audiobook because you were reading it while driving.
And yeah, when Ed said he wanted me to move to Paris at the end of the summer, I was like, well, I have to talk to Patrick, not for advice. I just need to tell him because we had broken up, but we always told each other everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have a phone. I called from a friend's house. This again is in West Bohemia. And I said, I met someone famous. And he said, he said, is it Michael Chabon? So, and then I'm transcribing some of Ed's writing into the book, and I transcribed the part that mentions when Patrick went with me to the hospital when Ed had his heart attack and his open heart surgery, and Ed woke up and was completely under drugs still, completely deluded, and started telling Patrick about how he and Patrick had auditioned for Rudolph Valentino's dance or something involving no pants and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like that for days. I mean, this was his last hospitalization, except he spent overnight for COVID once, but that is the maybe last quarter of my book is just talking about the medical issues and
Right.
the way he negotiated them, and we tried to make the best of it and everything, and how ultimately he just became quite a shut-in.
Right.
So all the
Well,
challenges of that.
but to go back to where you were, and so you call Patrick and say, by the way, I'm going to move in with this famous writer that we both like. And was he like, what the hell? Or go for it?
He was like, I don't know what to say. It was basically, it was like, I don't know what, babe, I don't know what to say. And then pretty soon, I think that the following fall, we were on tour, very short tour for a book called Our Paris, with collaborative drawings of his deceased lover who had died a year before I met Ed. And we saw Patrick and some other friends. We saw Patrick in DC, and they just became very good friends. And Ed dedicated one of his books to Patrick, and and that was the effect. That's probably the most important point. That was the effect that Ed had on people,
Right.
creating like communal kind of pods of people who generally got along. The way he changed my life, and you didn't ask, but the way he changed my life is he made me less of an introvert
Okay.
and just showed me how to try to entertain.
Well, I was actually reading a piece that you published, I guess, about 6 years ago. And if you don't mind, I'll read part of it to you. Maybe it'll trigger something.
Sure.
You said, I came to writing because I wanted to be honest about being a gay boy at a time when the stories told about being a gay boy in search of love was not fashionable, much less acceptable. Back then, I wanted to be my future husband, esteemed novelist Edmund White, but I don't want to be him anymore. I have him. I've, in a sense, possessed him. Do you remember writing that?
Maybe at that moment I was possessed or stoned. I was probably stoned.
But I understood what you meant about wanting to be him. And I think when I first read A Boy's Own Story, which I was a teenager in the Deep South, and I was like, whoa, I didn't know you could have a story like this that also had so much gay sex and that
Mm-hmm.
just felt like, oh, and I thought, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be.
Yes. And at the time, there wasn't whole lot of genre crossing and swapping and stuff like that. A book was a book, and a man was a man, and um, he was precisely who I wanted to be, including this misapprehension that I was under. I wanted to be richer, but he wasn't rich.
Right.
He was very odd. He was an old-fashioned Brooks Brother bohemian. He liked clothes, and he spent close to the line for a long time. And he gave me several gifts. He had never had a mortgage before we bought this apartment, and not long after that, he had never signed a mortgage. He started having mini strokes. So that started way back
Hmm.
27 years ago. And then they just there were no symptoms. And finally he started going on HIV cocktail. And he was getting serious. And the reason he wanted to come back to New York, he was also bored with Paris, but was also because he decided because of the cocktail, which he hadn't started taking yet, but it was inevitable, he was going to live and he needed a pension. And so that pension, whatever's left of it, is part of what I'm living on. I haven't paid off the apartment, but the apartment goes to me. And because of him, because I was married to him a minimum of 10 years and was 60 when I applied, I get spousal benefits, Social Security. So he gave me everything.
This is actually something I think is important to remind people. I mean, many of us, when we were younger, we all thought that we weren't going to live very long, so we should just have a great time and just live our lives and how and not think about the future and not save money. And many of my friends of a certain age are still that way because we never thought we had to think about retirement or living past our 30s, let alone into our 60s.
Right.
And you mentioned that that's why he got the job at Princeton, right? Was because he was like, "Oh, I need to actually start paying for things, and I
Yeah,
can't."
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Well, a big trade-off there could have been if he was underinsured, because to stay in France, he would never go broke getting medical care. But other than that, and I've been writing about this in the book, people ask him all the time, "Oh, don't you miss Paris?" And he's like, "Well, no, not really. I did it. I lived there, and all my friends are dead. Most importantly, you
right.
know." And he came here and he met all of these young writers, women, people of all color who knew him,
Mm-hmm.
knew his work. And it's not that we were isolated in Paris, it was more like we were sitting ducks, like
Right.
everybody comes to Paris and then the first thing we want to do is knock on your door, you know. And there are a lot of great readers of his in France, but there are a lot of readers of his here who come unexpectedly into my life. And after Ed died, in the days after, people I never met invited themselves over.
Oh,
Women. Yeah, big women fans.
that's interesting.
Yes. And one of the women had known Ed in Paris when she was 22, and they used to hobnob. And one of the women was somebody who was friendly to me on Facebook before I got off. And then another woman, I suddenly saw a tribute she wrote, and I wasn't even her friend. Somehow I came across this tribute that she wrote, and I'm like, she's talking about being a teenage girl
Mm-hmm.
reading Edmund White.
You're like, okay.
Okay.
Well, another favorite place of both of you was Key West, and actually, that's the first time you and I met. If I don't know if you remember.
Was that the seminar?
I was actually down there for a travel piece that I was working on for Out Magazine, and I think Aaron Hicklin was like, "Oh, you should hit up Michael. He'll show you around."
I can remember that. Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah,
met up at a bar, and then you introduced me to Island House. It was the first time I'd ever been to Island House,
yeah.
which I know that's where you wrote the stories for your second book, right? You liked
Well,
writing.
I wrote some of them. They're all set in and out of there. It's sort of an establishing shot, like the front of the Puck building on Will and Grace or something, keeps going back and back to that. My relationship with Key West at first was not so great, and I think it's because I was just an insecure person.
Hmm.
But Ed had so many friends, and most of them were extremely warm to me. And over time, I loosened up. The thing is, I wanted to be writing in Key West, and for a long time, I didn't get much writing done in Key West. I would just wander around imagining Truman Capote crossing the street or something like that.
There's a lot of distractions in Key West.
Yes.
But it
Yeah.
is a special place. I mean, I think when I was a kid, it was the first time I saw gay men holding hands because, as I mentioned, my
Yeah.
parents were from South Florida and we went down because my aunt lived in Isla Morada, one of the Keys, and we drove over the bridge and went, and I remember seeing these men, and I thought, oh, I didn't, I was like a kid, and I remember it sparked something, and every time I went back, it was always a different time in my life. And so definitely a different time when I met you because I was
Hmm.
like, now I'm a professional gay and I'm hanging
Hmm.
out with Edmund White's husband and all this other stuff. So, earlier this year, his memoir, The Loves of My Life, a sex memoir, came out, and that shocked a lot of people because it was like, what is an 85-year-old man, sharing all of this details? It didn't seem strange to people who knew his work or knew him, but I was really taken with the part, and I'm going to read it, where he wrote, "Some people wonder why I've not written about them. If they're a current part of my life, I need to keep them on life support. My husband is Michael Carroll, who I've been with since 1995. I've never written about him. He's too precious to me. Did you ever wonder why he'd never written about you?
No, I wasn't scared of it, but I never asked him to do it because I always wanted him to be 100% true to his self, unless it was the overuse of the word little. Then I have him strike. It's like there's like little peas and nice little peas and
Little penis.
little penis, small penis. Um, but subsequently, talking to his sister, who's still alive and older, and his best friend from college, Stan, I didn't know about this kind of impatient side that he had as a young man, where he would snap at people. And people told me, his sister told me that once he put their mother and her on a train and he just said, okay, bye. And then just jumped off the train. And then you peel back the layer, you find out that's exactly what his father was like. His father was no nonsense. He'd drop him off at the train station, not get out of the car and say, see you sometime, kid. And Ed was famous for the French leap, the Irish exit. I put that in the book because I find it bemusing as a Southerner. You know, I mean, I get it now, but I just wasn't raised that way.
Well, that's actually why I learned it as well, because as people know, Southerners can never just leave. Once they say they're leaving, then there's another half an hour of saying that they're leaving.
Right, exactly. That was my family driving back and forth between Tennessee and Texas, Tennessee and Florida. So, well, we better get on the road. And then more verbiage.
Do you feel like reading those pages now, or do you want to wait until later?
It could spur further discussion.
Yeah, why don't we do that?
Okay. I have many, many titles, but I came up with this kind of hokey, pretentious one. It has the same euphony as the title of V.S. Naipaul, who I love.
Okay.
The Miracle of Arrival. My husband, Edmund White, who died on his bedroom floor at 7:25 p.m. on June 3rd, 2025, would tell our guests about going as an HIV-positive gay man with his HIV-positive French then-lover, Hubert Sorin, to Ed's ancestral state of Texas. In one town, either Merkel, where his father was born, or Stephenville, where his mother was born, Ed ordered a custom-tooled leather belt at one of those iconically plainly clad seed and feed stores. He was told to come back in an hour and it would be ready. Ed and Hubert had a look around. The proudly French Hubert marveled at the completely exotic cowboy movie Texasness of it all, the perfectly horizontal flatness of the northeast Texas horizon, where every man wore Western boots. During the same period in Nashville, Hubert had bought boots for their evening at the Grand Ole Opry. While he clapped along to country music he didn't know the words to. When he and Ed went back to the seed and feed to pick up the belt, Ed asked the same man behind the counter how much he owed them. $5. $5? Why so little? 'Cause you're my cousin.
That does actually have resonances also with much of his writing.
Yeah.
So tell me about, like, when did you remember that? Why did you?
Well, that was I first heard that story, I believe, the weekend I met him. And the first two sections have to do with Texas. The next section is meeting his cousin and finding out that my first 7 years were spent in his hometown of Sweetwater, Texas. And these things kept happening. These like little ideas that there's a kind of inevitability. There's fairy dust. You know, my cousin and you're from the same town, and
Mhm.
there was just a lot of propitious, nice stuff that kept happening and kept preventing any major rift from happening. But at 30, I wasn't as mature as, say, the standard 30-year-old 50 years ago. I was
Okay.
very insecure with porous borders. And I was also irritable because he wanted to take up all this time socializing with people, breakfast, lunch, tea, dinner. And it takes me a lot of crank up to write a few lines where he was working on the Farewell Symphony. And he'd be like, okay, I did my writing for the day. And then he would read it to me and I'd be like, God, fuck you. This horse shit. Enough already. And so I didn't always take well to that. I said, I can't do everything you do, okay? I'm slow and I'm not used to being able to write full time. I need full time for that. Mm-hmm. And I traced that in the book because I didn't publish my first book until I was 50.
Right.
I kept wasting time on novels that wouldn't have been very interesting to people, you know? More than anything, I think a novel these days should describe a life that is not quite your own as the reader. Mm-hmm. And I think what I was doing is kind of banal. When I moved over to the short story, suddenly I had a style. And that style was what maybe recommended. It was a little bit borrowed here and there. But I could feel the language living. And with the novel, it was just dutifulness. And we would argue, because Ed was hugely cultured, obviously. And I would complain about something I was writing. I said, oh, it's just so overwrought. And he said, overwrought? I've heard that word all my life. And what does it mean?
Well, you ended up writing many of those stories at Barracuda, which is a bar that no longer exists in Chelsea, which is right down the block from where you live.
Yeah.
So that's also interesting, though, because you would think it'd be hard to write stories during happy hour at a bar.
Well, happy hour generally at Barracuda wasn't very lively. I would sit in the back lounge with earplugs, drink white wine. It was easier than writing at home. Writing with him around, to be honest.
I was curious about that because, my husband's an academic and I sometimes say he sucks all the energy out of the room because he's so intense when he's working that I'm like, I feel like an idiot next to him. And it sounds like you had a little bit of that as well.
Yeah. And I wanted there to be separation. I always wanted him to write exactly what he wanted to write. And if he asked my opinion, then I would tell it. We would do these things called plot walks. Where he would read to me and I would say, well, what happens next? And he would give me the ideas and I would say, well, what about that other character? What if this happened and then this and this? And then they meet in the middle again or something like that. And he would often take that. He became a little bit more plot oriented later. He developed an incredible span of styles.
So obviously you guys had decades of commitment, but you also had an open marriage or open relationship. And I know sometimes when we talk about that with people who don't understand it, it's becoming more common these days. In the last few years, it seems like everyone's talking about it. But for a long time, I felt like people would diminish the relationship and say, well, you guys aren't really in love because if you have this open situation, then it can't be. Tell me about navigating that and like how you feel about that and how people reacted.
Okay, well, it's interesting because once got into an argument with a bartender at the Island House about this, but he was straight, and it was very odd. He was heterosexual, lived with his girlfriend, and he would do that gotcha thing. I can't remember what they call it. It's like when they just shower you with questions. He was like, then why are you with him? Because we get along together. Why aren't you having sex with him? I said, because we sleep with other people. Then why are you living with him? You know that thing that's the right winger podcasters do that,
right?
So the answer after that preamble is that most people who knew about it, anybody who knew about it, just didn't talk about it with us. But I mean, like Joyce Carol Oates knew about Ed's boyfriends and was willing to talk about it. Almost everybody knew. Everybody, because Ed was so generally nice and friendly toward them, gave him a kind of special status. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe some of them pitied me because I was the one who was suddenly going out to the movies because somebody was coming over for sex, But then I got other boyfriends, and they're basically long term. A relationship is an excuse not to have sex, I think is what it is. But it's permission not to have sex. Um, and I don't even know if my parents knew about it.
You both wrote about it. It's not like it was private.
Well, my parents are like not exactly fireside readers. Yeah. Oh God, now I can't remember where I was going with that. But I think among the worst were the gays about it. Usually the ones who were single. I think they just imagined that once they had a relationship, the sky was the limit. This was great and all that. So I recommend it if you're not sure about your sexuality. No, I mean if you're not sure about where you want to go. Like I like to have sex with strangers. That's
Right.
that's a hangover from my youth, which was slightly thwarted by AIDS. But part of the excitement is like feeling like I'm in the public toilet in front of the urinal.
Well, I think you wrote about this, and I know I've grappled with it as well, but you wrote that Ed allowed you to have all of this. And I think it's partly
Yeah.
having the trust and the commitment and the safety net of a partner that you can then explore things that maybe would be more dangerous if you were single.
Yes, and that brings up some things I'd never thought before or thought along the way, but never said to people. I was never once jealous or paranoid that he was going to find someone else
Hmm.
because we had reached the right level of mutual tolerance. We knew how to deal with each other. He knew I was going to lose my shit sometimes, and I knew that he was going to run away or something like that, but not about relationships, about things around the house. I never felt insecure. And then, like, he would get a boyfriend while I was away would say, I think you should kick Michael out and move me into the apartment so I can focus on my acting career. Two of the dumbest sentences ever said.
But it is our biggest fear, right? Everyone always thinks like, I mean, I remember when I moved to Europe with my boyfriend, now husband, but we'd only been dating for a year, and I quit my job and was living with him and didn't have any money, and my mom was like, "What are you going to do if he breaks up with you?" Which first, it was great that she acknowledged that I had a partner because that was a new thing. But I also was like, I had no fear that that was going to happen, and yet everyone around me was like, "But what if he kicks you to the curb? What are you going to do?" And I was like, "That's not going to happen." It's a fear that others then place on you sometimes when you have the faith that your relationship is strong enough.
Yeah. And it's not something that's related to that concept of intentionality. It just works or it doesn't in my experience. Because there were times though I was like, you know what, I'm out of here. Had
Hmm.
enough, you know. But I never like left for the night or anything like that. He was different about almost everything. I was listening to an interview he did with his nephew in 2001 when his nephew's memoir about Ed helping raise him in New York.
That's the boy with a thorn in his side, right?
Exactly. And which I quote extensively in my book, quoting memoirs that quote memoirs. But I was surprised when they got into a little argument on that radio show because Keith, the nephew, said, one thing I learned from my uncle is that, and gay life, observing gay life, is that, and he's straight, gay men are so much warmer than straight men. And Ed said, I don't believe that. And he said, you don't? Well, you used to. I said, yeah, but I changed my mind. But, the ability to change your mind is a gift unless it has to do with the presidency.
Right.
But, you know, that he was able to grow and learn to lasso his impatience, never able to lasso the French exit problem, but whatever.
Well, so I'm going to ask you a question that I know is a hard question, but I think you've thought about this, so we can take our time. But I ask everybody, how do they define love? And I was curious, since you've been thinking about this in your writing, how do you define it?
I think it's a fairly almost involuntary response system or something. Like you just naturally want to help take care of a person.
Hmm.
And I'm not anti-psychology or anything, but there's oftentimes, and there's a lot of good reasons for language surrounding boundaries and stuff like that. But what is the word for the love that is completely understood? It just means that you don't expect anything in return.
Right.
And I grew up in church. That used to be a Christian idea. I wrote it somewhere in there and then I forgot it. But I never had that kind of love as a child.
Hmm. There was always conditions.
Unconditional is exactly what I'm saying. Yes. And this is supported because I thought, oh goodness, I mean, that everybody's worried about codependency, and then later they're worried about something else, boundaries and all that stuff. And I went through a really terrible time with a younger guy who turned out to have serious mental illness.
Hmm.
And I started reading, and I read Alice Miller. I don't know if you ever heard of
Hmm.
her, Drama of the Gifted Child. And she was laying out these concepts, and she did believe that a child needed to have a sense of unconditional love,
Right.
which I think has a lot to do with my constant sense of fear, which I realized had to have been quelled somewhat with Ed alive, because I'm now worrying about things that were problems 10 years ago, like
Hmm.
the kitchen cabinets or something. But somehow, for a while, I could float without worrying, unless it had to do with getting him to the doctor or something like that.
Well, you for years were a caregiver, which is its own responsibility and its own burden, and you probably never predicted that that was going to be your role.
No, I wasn't far-sighted enough to know that. I guess that because he was pretty hale for such a long time, that it seems subtle. His aging seemed kind of subtle. I mean, I knew I would have, and I do remember, I'm glad you brought that up. I do remember when he asked me to move to Paris, thinking, okay, this is it. I can never put him in a nursing home.
Hmm.
I was going to refuse to do that. And I swear it almost tested me. And I remember thinking, I'm going to have to put him in a nursing home. His mobility is so shot now.
Hmm.
He can hardly maneuver. And I'm just grateful I didn't have to.
Right.
I think he knew it was coming hours before, and I think he was okay.
Meaning you feel like he knew that this was his time and that he was ready to go.
Yeah, he was just like really sick for 2 days, and I talked to the provider, and I started trying to read his blood oxygen, which I'd been doing since he had COVID. And I said it won't give a reading. He said that's because he's so dehydrated. The laser can't penetrate.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry you had to do that, but it's also impressive that you were able to manage it.
Yeah, I didn't. The last few days, I was thinking I've got to call the insurance people and get a home health aide, because he had a secondary policy that would cover that. Not every day of the year, but frequently enough so that I could leave the apartment without worrying he was going to fall. That
Right.
kind of thing. I mean, not having sex, not fucking around is not the major problem of being in a marriage. Okay?
Hmm.
Like, that's child's play. That's just schoolyard snark. This is serious. And I wasn't always the most patient. But how you do or don't rise, it doesn't say whether or not you're a good person, but it can give you a somewhat failed, but nonetheless their sense of self-esteem.
Right. Well, you are using his bedroom as your office. Is that partly because you're sort of channeling moments, or what's the, I mean, that's intense. I don't know if I could do that.
No, I spent a lot of time. First of all, that's my bathroom, the one that is connected to this
Hmm.
room, because there wasn't enough room in that bathroom as a shower shelf, shower bench for him. Ever since his strokes, he had to be on a shower bench. So much so that I had to replace the original one.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was in and out all the time. When he texted me in the morning from the next room, I would get up and go in there, and I would take care of the urine problem and get him his coffee and talk to him and change his underwear, that kind of stuff. And grief is not as strong, not as constant as fear for me.
Mm-hmm.
The grief really was grinding along there for a while, and it comes back, you know.
Well, I know you've probably given a lot of advice to young guys over the years, and one of the things with the Queer Love Project is I guess I've been really surprised that with all the progress we've made, right? We know how hard it was in the 80s and 90s, and as you have said, like no one even expected us to find love. And yet now people are still saying that they can't find love. And I'm curious, when people ask you about it, what kind of advice do you give them? Like, what do you tell them to do? Or do you refuse to give advice?
I refuse to give advice because I don't want to be that queen. Oh, she's just bitter. I
That's
think
also
it.
good advice.
I would say don't go into it looking to possess somebody.
Mm,
Go into it to maybe become a better person, or at least indulge your better side a little more,
hmm
and give something and see if you get. You know, people don't always get back, but that can't be the main incentive. I think some people have, you know what, I do give advice. I just don't have very high expectations, okay? That's the advice.
That's great
You
advice.
know, because I know those people who really get on their high horse about stuff, and they think they're owed something because they're virtuous. This is a consequence of our stupid religion. And they think they're owed something, and they want Jacob Elordi, not that guy. I work out, you know, you know, and I think I didn't know when I met Carlos, my current boyfriend, my fiance.
hmm
I had no expectations, and he wouldn't have been my first choice, but now I just think he's really beautiful, especially from the moment I saw him across the crowded Barracuda, which is where we agreed to meet. I was like, this guy is electric, you know, he's just
Yeah.
electric.
So I know you've been dating Carlos. I didn't know you were engaged. Congrats. When did that happen?
Around the time that I saw you last,
Okay.
here, I don't know when.
It was a couple months ago.
It was always implicit. You got to be with someone you're most comfortable with, you
Right.
know. Uh, so
Well, thank you for sharing all this with me. I know it hasn't been easy and I appreciate it.
it hasn't been easy, actually, but I appreciate it too.
Well, I know you're working on your book. There's the graphic novel of A Boy's Own Story, which is already out, right?
Oh yeah, it came out in 2023.
2023. There's a documentary, there's other things that are happening, and you're responsible for the Edmund White estate. So is there anything? I know there's a novel coming out soon, right?
There's a novel called Spirit Lamp, and it's a very highly fictionalized version of his nephew's story, the nephew that he helped raise
hmm
here in New York, and a reissue of the Flaneur with an introduction by Alex Chi.
Oh, cool. Well, Michael, I just want to thank you again for doing this and joining us and sharing all of this. I'm sure people will get a lot out of it.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And to anybody who listens, thank you.
If you're a new listener to the Queer Love podcast and aren't already a subscriber to the Queer Love Project, you can find us on Substack. It's a platform where LGBTQ plus people share stories and experiences about whatever love means to them. We keep all our words free and publish original personal essays and interviews every week. So go to queerloveproject.substack.com and subscribe and support us today.